G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff Ukraine War Update for the 15th of July 2024. I'm your host, the author David Applegate, author of the books The Boyhood Arcade, Power Games, Into the Elsenbound and Erotic Tales from the Empire Part 1 coming soon. Thank you to all those who support the channel. I appreciate it. You can support me through Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree. You can scan the QR code now or wait till after the show. Alright. Please and thank you to all those who support the channel. And on to the news. Alright, so we have the usual... I think it's become weekly now. Somebody leaves the Ukraine government, becomes an ambassador. We don't really know exactly what's going on in the Kiev government because they're about as transparent as mud. But what we do know is that Ukraine is unstable. It is increasingly violent, and increasingly they are always blaming the Russians. Did a Russian agent assassinate two people in Kiev? Or was it two frustrated Ukrainians who shot him in public? Despite the crowd, despite the consequences, the latter is more likely than the former. But of course, the dominating news, of course, is going to be not the war itself, but Trump's ultimatum. Alright, Trump has threatened Russia and those who trade with Russia with 100% tariffs. Now, it's not much, it's for the US. Okay? What trade with Russia remains is very little, mostly on a humanitarian basis, and is exempt from tariffs. What trade that is left that is tariffed is insignificant to the Russian economy. I'm talking about the US, right? From the US perspective, it will have very little impact on Russia immediately. What it will impact are the major trading partners, which is India and China, and they have threatened to retaliate. But you've got to remember, Trump already beat them in a trade war once, and despite all the talk, and it is talk. Now, Dmitry Medvedev is leading the charge, along with the Chinese foreign minister, downplaying the effect of Trump's tariffs. Now, some people have said that isolating the Russian economy has forced the Russians, which they're already doing anyway, to become more self-reliant, which they were doing anyway. Now, a lot of people don't realise this, but they have actually cut ties with some Chinese companies as well. Now, this was more to do with the protection of the Russian car industry than any fallout over Ukraine, where China was preparing to undermine the Russian car industry. And then Russia tried to replace Volkswagen, I think it was, or BMW/Volkswagen with, was it Great Wall or Cherry? I think it was Great Wall, but it might have been BYD. But the point is, that fell through because they started moving strategic factories to China. These strategic factories were making cars, armoured cars, for Russia, and China, basically. This is what happens between strategic importance and the free market. You can't have both, okay? You can't have a free market when it comes to strategic importance, because in the free market, the bigger countries will use their bigger companies to buy you out and turn you into vassal states. All right, so Dmitry, former Prime Minister, former President, Deputy Head of Security Council, said to be Putin's replacement, Although he's not exactly young. He's 59. But still, in the terms of Russian leadership, that's young. But, yeah. I think he's understating the fact that Trump is hitting bricks with an additional tariff, and he is, well, like I said, you want to know who's interested in peace or not, and Putin fell into the trap. I said this: if Putin is interested in peace, he would call out Zelensky, put his case on the international table. Putin has underestimated the importance of media transparency to the world. He underestimated his interview with Tucker Carlson, which has been ignored by 90% of the world, and downplayed by, and failed to make a case for Ukraine to the rest of the world. And by failing to put a comprehensive peace plan on the table, transparent, and falling into Zelensky's trap, right? Every time Zelensky calls for peace, he attacks Russia and gets away with it. Every time Russia retaliates, we only hear often about the retaliation. And because channels like mine don't get massive support, the truth does not resonate. People don't want the truth. I know this, okay? People want their bias confirmed. The majority out there are not interested in the facts. They're interested in having their bias confirmed. Because they think they're good people. And because they're good people, that must mean they're always right. That is the trap of emotion. Emotional people are weak. Weak people tend to be immature. Weak people do not base their facts on observation. Weak people exaggerate. Weak people will say anything to tear down others. And weak people, of course, are predatory. Okay? They prey on others. They cannot be self-reliant. They prey on others. Whether they be government workers wanting big paychecks and using collective bargaining comrades. But that is the fact that you have to deal with. And the only way to deal with weak people is to form your own coalitions against them. To laugh, to mock, to ridicule those who think Ukraine is stunning and brave. Because they're nothing but petty fascists who went on a killing spree since 2014, exploiting the fact that Europe has long-standing phobia about Russian invasion, yet they allow millions of migrants. More migrants are poured into Europe than Russia. You know, Europe's killed itself. So, again, with the propaganda, where people who are clean, with new clothes and makeup on, are pretty much inexplicably photoshopped into what would you call it? It is a war scene, I suppose. But it's a scene of devastation without context. And he's there without context to try and elicit an emotional response that, oh, that poor man, oh, he's so hard done by. Because weak people give in to what they see rather than examining what they see. A picture may tell a story of 1,000 words, but doesn't mean it's fact. In the age of Photoshop and airbrushing and lack of context, and again, the constant barrage of Russia only attacks civilian targets. The constant barrage of propaganda, the constant demand for increasing the war, the constant claim that they're all about justice and lasting peace. Then why? Because weak people believe it. Weak people base their beliefs on their confirmed bias, in which case there's no cure for weak people. You have to let them fail. You cannot stand up for them. You can only stand up to them and tell them to fuck off. You cannot fix them. You cannot save them. They're pathetic parasites. All right, so we have drone attacks across Ukraine and drone attacks on Russia. You have Russian has bombed Sumy. They continue with the buffer zone here in the north. Still, this is 2 years of stalled. I mean, I suppose, and I would put this to you, that the mistake Russia is making, the biggest mistake Russia is making, is advancing too far past borders and not they really need to sell and they really need to not only confirm or affirm and confirm both in word and deed that what their military goals are and stick to it. And I really think they need to basically put more on the table. I mean, they would get a better deal with Trump and more peace and secure an economic future today within the 50-day period, of course. Trump's given them 50 days. There's plenty of time to do this. And that is, put the vote on the table. If Russia's so adamant, or basically start drawing a line. Because if they don't if they don't take the initiative, history will forever condemn the entire nation. Ukraine will get away with the slaughter of civilians because of the Euro left and the infinitely weak right, who constantly give in to narratives because they're so strong and so rugged and so individual. Russia bad. Africa's your enemy. Islam is your enemy. China's your enemy. India's your enemy. Wake up, smell the fishes. Mexico's your goddamn fucking enemy. Have you seen how Mexicans treat foreigners? And yet they pour over your border calling it a human right. Pakistan hates you, yet they pour over your border and call it a human right. Well, they have their independence days. And call you colonizer. Now, Russia's advanced further up this road. though they haven't advanced much where else, although they have claimed to have taken control of this area here, this town, but it hasn't updated on the map, and we'll see over the next 48 hours perhaps. Again, fighting here. Yeah, definitely moving to cut this off here. And seriously, I don't see in 50 days Russia taking all of this and then calling it quits. Their progress in fighting has not been. Their progress is too slow. I know it's deliberate. I think they thought they had more time. They've made a strategic mistake by politically and again, just because the BRICS nations are not as united as they make out to be, that China wanted a forever war in Ukraine so that they could invade Taiwan and split the American forces, believing that they could create tension in the Middle East, Yemen, Iran, Ukraine, Korea, and pretty much the United States and Europe, with cowards and of course, and cut off the Pacific. Now, China's bragging that that bragging even, that they are proud to have prolonged the Ukraine war. So I think, it might actually be too late. That Trump should have brought these should have done something sooner. But, people, there's a lot on his plate, and people are obsessed with Epstein, even though they're a bigger fish to fry. Why are people obsessing over files written by the Obama administration when you're never going to get the truth out of that? And several key people have been murdered, and you're never going to get to the bottom of that. And then, of course, you've got the phenomenon of no matter what is said, those who want their conspiracy theories confirmed will never believe what they're told. You were told UFOs were spiritual, not physical. You were told that JFK was killed by a rogue organisation that was later dismantled, that they had confessed, yet somehow you still think there's a JFK conspiracy, even though they've told you they confessed. But looking at the map, 50 days, the lack of progress. Russia's offensive. They talk about the Russian offensive. Well, it started 2 weeks ago. So let's see. I would say by the end of July, Russia's going to carve a line, a new border. That this is actually the buffer zone. And they will come probably through here. And go down. They will they'll probably want this river as a border. Mostly they're in a good strategic position. Now it's possible that they've never intended to take this. They might not intend to take Silvesk or any of these towns where they haven't. This is possibly why they're stalled in some areas. I think they're looking at pretty much maybe cutting the bottom off the Zelensky line, making it weaker. But I don't think they see it in their interest to take it. Obviously, Putin doesn't want to show his hand. Because if you know his end goal, you'll act according to that end goal. But you can see that Russia brings physical photo evidence, but the majority of the world doesn't see it, that Ukraine attacks civilian targets. But because of the bias against Russia, so many people don't care. But you can't claim to have ethics and morals when you deliberately ignore the criminal acts of Ukraine. You can't say you adhere to an international law when, and as Budapest points out, Hungary's called on the European Union to impose sanctions on Ukrainian leaders for Hungarian citizens being forced to fight. Beaten to death after forced conscription, despite being a Hungarian citizen, to take a stand against forced military conscription in Ukraine. It's a start. It is a crime. Japan is worried about the economic fallout because the war is starting to impact trade. It's fair enough. But here's the problem. Every country wants to be a major exporter. China wants to be pretty much the only major exporter, and India wants to take China's place. Now, the liberal world order originally is that was imposed on the world in 1948, was agreed to by Russia and China and the United States, and in some part France, Europe and Germany, in which trade would be split around the world between the major powers. You have the G7. But increasingly that trade has been undermined by China's slavery of its own people. China, it's not the only one. India deliberately keeping its wages down. And of course, the absurdity of communism, in which the state just printed money to subsidise, and basically the whole world is insane when it comes to consumption. I think a lot of world economies are fake. China might sell 100 million in garbage, you know, for want of a better word. But they might sell it for 199 yuan, but the box price is 100, 200 or 2,000 yuan. Sorry, and they'll retail it. They'll record the GDP at retail, not at the actual wholesale price. Chinese spending, they'll build this huge railway and claim, all GDP grew. And they only add to their GDP. But remember, they don't discount by the debt. Now, the Chinese clearly are lying that US sanctions will not help the conflict. I think they will. I think it'll take a couple of weeks. And then Russia will either have to pivot to scramble. Because ultimately, even if Russia is self-sufficient and cut off from the rest of the world, increasing isolation will allow China to undermine Russia in everywhere. Which is why China wants the conflict. They want Russia weak. China wants to take over Russia. But you have idiots like Lindsey Graham who wants to list Moscow as a terrorist and extremist organisation and impose 500% tax on their tariffs and all this. The beating the war chest. Evil Russians, evil Russians. When you should be saying evil Obama and evil coup in Ukraine. But because of the Europe and its Russophobia and selfish nature, they won't bloody come to the table and say, you know what, fuck Ukraine. And of course, Russia has its own deep state paranoias about Germany. So everybody's been motivated by their fears, which means you're weak. But Russia is bleeding Ukraine's defences, slowly and deliberately. I've said this so often. But of course, sorry YouTube, it is what it is. I've lost most of my videos on YouTube. I can't go back and upload them. Hundreds of videos, I can't go back and upload them. I can't get people to resubscribe. When your account gets shut down because allegedly hacked. And then suddenly it's allegedly restored. But when it was restored, it was blank. Alright, so according to the Russians, they have made advances here in the north, which aren't reflected here on this map. But still, at the rate that they're advancing here, you're right, it would take 300 years to conquer half of Ukraine. And again, here's the dotted front line. They have caught up, but it's still, this is showing more advances than what Ukraine's map is reporting down here. But it does show there was advances. Just not as... It's possible that they're a little bit further ahead than what shows on the map. But they're on the outskirts of this town. But it doesn't really matter. What matters to most people is perception. But yet they don't see what's happening in Ukraine. Zelensky's panicking. Why, if he's such a good, He served as Prime Minister, right? But if he's such a good Prime Minister, why is he Defence Minister? And if he's such a good Defence Minister at managing resources, why is he a country limited resources? You mean it's not your limited resources, it's Europe's unlimited resources. Zelensky's a liar, of course, but he's trying to expand his powers and calling it moves to retain presidential powers. He wants to be president for life. He's the next Ceausescu, and people just can't see it. He's replacing anybody and forcing them out who could challenging him. How is somebody who could manage your resources be a good ambassador? But he also could be positioning himself. Yeah, multiple corruption scandals. Yeah. Could be positioning himself to avoid prosecution for stealing without Zelensky's permission. Or Zelensky's throwing him under a bus and done a deal with Europe, saying, you're giving in to Russian disinformation. President Trump is right. Russia will ultimately prevail. Ukraine can and will be destroyed. But he's given them 50 days to come up with a ceasefire agreement based on legitimate interests of all people living in this region. Medvedev, of course, as I said, he's panicking. He's trying to position himself as the replacement for Putin. He thinks himself as the replacement for Putin. A lot of people think of him as the replacement for Putin. It's not my place to decide who replaces Putin, or if or when. I'm just telling you as it is, and as some people see it. And perhaps he is trying to become the next president of Russia. I mean, Putin won't live forever, and it's only a matter of time before Putin has to step down anyway. And this has been stated several times, that this is probably his last time in office. And I think that is one of the reasons why it is so difficult for him, because the hardliners won't let him stop the war, and it's the same with Ukraine. The Ukrainian hardliners won't let Zelensky stop the war. But the difference is Putin will be retired, whereas Zelensky will get Saddammed. Yeah, it's a verb now, getting Saddammed. Although some people would say Gaddafi'd. Let's see, you have to go further back, but yeah, get thrown under the bus like Pinochet. Even though the left was far more violent and killed far more people than... You know that, right? The left killed tens of thousands of people in Argentina. But, oh no, Pinochet bad. Yeah, because that's... Who's saying Pinochet's bad? The freaking left-wing media. Stop taking your history lessons and your morality lessons from the left. Because they have none. I think Trump is giving Russia an out here. Dmitry Peskov is waiting on the proposal for the next round of negotiations. And because Trump's given an ultimatum, Kiev will not be in a hurry. Because they'll leverage Trump. This is the problem with ultimatums. They use everything. When you take... Zelensky will use this now as leverage. Saying, oh look, Russia's run out the clock. Because the Western Europeans will never admit that Ukraine is a piece of shit that should be brushed off their shoe, left and put in a big red line and say, here Russia, this is yours, war over. And it would be over. But these jerks in NATO want their 6 minutes to Moscow. Why? Because they want to go around crying and say, look at me, I made everybody safe. While Paris is full of Africans burning everything, raping, looting and pillaging. Because everybody is a fucking selfish hypocrite as far as I'm concerned when it comes to peace. Because you won't do what it takes. You won't tell the Africans to fuck off. You won't tell the Muslims, hey, you know what? You had a civil war and a war against empires. So you got no freaking right to migrate to other countries. You're hypocrites. No way, colonizer. Go home, colonizer. Africans calling us colonizers. We're in the West. Africans should be all mass deported tomorrow. Out of every country should be mass deporting Africans back to Africa. You crybaby hypocrites. But you're so afraid of being called a racist. Just like all these people who are afraid to stand up against Ukraine and say, because they're afraid of being called a Putin puppet. Now, Putin might not be the good guy in most scenarios. But Zelensky is the bad guy in every scenario. He is not a victim. He's the perpetrator. He's the little bastard who ran up to Russia, kicked them in the shins, and then ran and hid behind Europe's skirts. Europe and their security concerns. You had, time and time again, security treaties on the table that you all walked away from, that you all tore up, that you all ignored. You had the Minsk Accords, and the Minsk Accords too. You had the Turkish agreement. Ankara. I think it was, Ankara agreement. And forget all about all the other agreements you all had and all these other things. Why? Because Lindsey Graham said the quiet part out loud. But we can't let Russia have those resources. Not up to you, Lindsey Graham. You're not fighting the war, Lady Gaga. Most of these people who cheer on the Ukraine war will never suffer the consequences for all the dead civilians. Because you always think you're right and everybody else is wrong. Now, thank you all for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and please support the channel. You can support me on Patreon. I have two. You can buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree. Please and thank you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.